Pollyanna, Chapter 23. An accident. At Mrs. Snow's request, Pollyanna went one day to Dr. Chilton's office to get the name of a medicine which Mrs. Snow had forgotten. As it chanced, Pollyanna had never before seen the inside of Dr. Chilton's office. "I've never been to your home before. This is your home, isn't it?" she said, looking interestedly about her. The doctor smiled a little sadly. "Yes, such a 'tis," he answered, as he wrote something on the pad of paper in a hand. "But it's a pretty poor apology for a home, Pollyanna. They're just room, that's all, not a home." Pollyanna nodded her head wisely. Her eyes glowed with sympathetic understanding. "I know. It takes a woman's hands and a heart or a child presence to make a home," she said. The doctor wheeled about abruptly. "Mr. Pendleton told me," nodded Pollyanna again, "about the woman hands and heart, or the child presence, you know. Why don't you get a woman hands and heart, Dr. Chilton? Or maybe you'll take Jimmy Beans if Mr. Pendleton doesn't want him." Dr. Chilton laughed a little constrainedly. "So Mr. Pendleton say you take a woman hands and heart to make a home, does he?" he asked avishly. "Yes, he says it's just a house too. Why don't you, Dr. Chilton?" "Why don't I? What?" the doctor asked, turning back to his desk. Get a woman hand and heart." "Oh, and I forgot." Pollyanna's face showed suddenly a painful color. "I suppose I ought to tell you. It was an Aunt Polly that Mr. Pendleton loved long ago. And see, we aren't going there to live. You see, I told you it was, but I made a mistake. I hope you didn't tell anyone," she finished anxiously. "No, I didn't tell anyone, Pollyanna," replied the doctor a little queerly. "Oh, that's all right," then sighed Pollyanna in relief. "You see, you're the only one I told, and I thought Mr. Pendleton looked sort of funny when I said I told you." "Did he?" The doctor's lips twitched. "Yes, and of course he wasn't want many people to know it when it wasn't true. And why don't you get a woman's hands and heart, Dr. Chilton?" There was a moment's silence. Then, very gravely, the doctor said, "They're not always to be had for the asking, little girl." Pollyanna frowned thoughtfully. "But I should think you could get him," she argued. The flattering emphasis was unmistakable. "Thank you," laughed the doctor with an unlifted eyebrow, then gravely again. "I'm afraid some of your older sisters would be quite so confident. At least they haven't shown themselves to be so obliging." He observed Pollyanna frown again, then her eyes widened in surprise. "Why, Dr. Chilton, you don't mean you didn't try to get somebody hand and heart once like Mr. Pendleton and couldn't, did you?" The doctor just forgot of his a little abruptly. There, Pollyanna, never mind about that now. Don't let other people trouble worry your little head. Suppose you run back now to Mrs. Snow. I've written down the name of the medicine and the direction, how she's to take it. Was there anything else?" Pollyanna shook her head. "No, sir. Thank you, sir," she murmured soberly as she turned back toward the door. From the little hallway she called back, her face suddenly alight. "Anyhow, I'm glad it wasn't my mother hands and heart that you wanted, and couldn't get, Dr. Chilton. Goodbye." It was on the last day of October that the accident occurred. Pollyanna, hurrying home from school, crossed the road at an apparently safe distance in front of swiftly approaching the motor car. Just what happened no one could seem to tell afterward. Neither was there anyone around who could tell why it happened, or what was to blame, or who was to blame that it did happen. Pollyanna, however, at 5 o'clock, was borne limp and unconscious into the little room that was so dear to her. There was a white-faced Aunt Polly and a weeping Nancy. She was undressed tenderly and put to bed, while from the village, hastily summoned by telephone, Dr. Warren was hurrying as fast as another motor car could bring him. "And you didn't need to more than look at her aunt's face," Nancy was sobbing to old Tom in the garden after the doctor arrived and was closeted in the hushed room. "You didn't need to more and looked at her aunt's face to see that it wasn't no duty that it was eating her. Your hands don't shake and your eyes don't look as if you're just trying to hold back the angel of death himself when you're just don't doing your duty, Mr. Tom. They don't. Is she hurt bad? The old man's voice shook. There ain't no telling, sobbed Nancy. She lay back that while and still she might easy to be dead, but Miss Polly said she wasn't dead, and Miss Polly had ought to know. If anyone would, what? She kept up listening and feeling for the heartbeats and her breath. Couldn't you tell anything they'd done to her? That old Tom face worked constantly. Nancy's lips were relaxed a little. I wish you would call it something, Mr. Tom, and something good and strong too. Drat it, to think of running down our little girl. I always hate the evil smelling things. Anyhow, I did. But where is she hurt? I don't know, moaned Nancy. There's a little cut on her blessed head, but it isn't bad. That ain't Miss Polly say, but she's afraid it's infernally. She's hurt. A faint flicker came into old Tom's eyes. I guess you mean internally, Nancy, he said dryly. She's hurt infernally, all right. Plotch, take that Odie mobile, and I don't guess Miss Polly would be using that words all the same. Well, I don't know, moaned Nancy with a shake of her head. As she turned away, seemed as if I just couldn't stand it till that doctor gets out of there. I wish I had washing to do, the biggest washing I ever see. I do, she wailed, wringing her hand helplessly. Even after the doctor was gone, however, there seemed to be little that Nancy could tell Mr. Tom. There appeared to be no bones and brokens, and cut was slight of consequence, but the doctor looked very grave, and shaking his head slowly, and had said that time alone could tell. After he had gone, Miss Polly had shown the face even whiter and more drawn-looking than before. The patient had not fully recovered consciousness, but at present she seemed to be resting as comfortably as could be expected. A trained nurse had been sent for, and would come that night. That was all. And Nancy turned sobbingly and went back to her kitchen. It was sometime during the next forenoon that Pollyanna opened conscious eyes and realized where she was. Why, Aunt Polly, what's the matter? Isn't it daytime? Why don't I get up? She cried. Why, Aunt Polly, I can't get up. She cried. Why, Aunt Polly, she moaned, falling back on the pillow after an unofficially attempt to lift herself. No, dear, I won't try just yet, soothed her aunt quickly but very quietly. But what is the matter? Why can't I get up? Miss Polly asked an agonized question of the white-capped young woman standing in the window out of rage of Pollyanna's eyes. The young woman nodded. Tell her, the lips said. Miss Polly cleared her throat and tried to swallow the lumps that would scarcely let her speak. You were hurt, my dear, by the automobile last night. But never mind that now. Auntie wants you to rest and go to sleep again. Hurt? Oh, yes, I ran. Pollyanna, her eyes were dazed. She lifted her hand to her forehead. Why, it's done up and it's hurt. Yes, dear, but never mind. Just rest. But Aunt Polly, I feel so funny and so bad. My leg feels so queer, only they don't feel at all. With an imploring look in the nurse faces, Miss Polly struggled to her feet and turned away. The nurse came forward quickly. Suppose you let me talk to you now, she began cheerily. I think it's high time we were getting acquainted. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Miss Hunt, and I've come and to help your aunt take care of you. And the very first thing I'm going to do is to ask you to swallow these white pills for me. Pollyanna's eyes grew a bit wild. But I didn't want to be taken care of. That is, not for long. I want to get up. You know, I go to school. Can't I go to school tomorrow? From the window where Aunt Polly stood, now there came a half-stifled cry. Tomorrow? Smiled the nurse brightly. Well, I may not let you out quite so soon as that, Miss Pollyanna, but just swallow these little pills for me, please, and we'll see what they'll do." "All right," agreed Pollyanna, somewhat doubtfully, "but I must go to school the day after tomorrow. Their examination then, She spoke again a minute later. She spoke of school and of automobile and of how her head ached, but very soon her voice trailed into silence under the blessed influence of the little white pills she had swallowed. Chapter 24. John Pendleton. Pollyanna did not go to school tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow. Pollyanna, however, did not realize this, except monitoring the brief period full consciousness sent insistent question to her lips. Pollyanna did not realize anything. In fact, very clearly, until a week had passed, then the fever subsided, the pain lessened somewhat, and her mind awoke to full consciousness. She had then to be told all over again what had happened, what had occurred. "And it's so hurt that I am, and not sick," and she sighed at last. "Well, I'm glad of that." "Glad, Pollyanna?" asked her aunt, who was sitting by the bed. "Yes, I'd be so much rather have a broken leg like Mr. Pendleton than lifelong invalids like Mrs. Snow." Broken legs get well and lifelong invalids don't. Miss Polly, who had said nothing whatever about broken leg, and got suddenly to her feet and walked to the little dressing table across the room. She was picking one object after another and putting each down in an aimless fashion, quite unlike her usual decisiveness. Her face was not aimless looking at all, however. It was white and drawn. On the bed, Pollyanna, by blinking at the dancing band of color on the ceiling, which came from one of its prints in the windows. "I'm glad it isn't smallpox that ailed me, too," she murmured contentedly. "That would be worse than freckle. And I'm glad it isn't whooping cough. I've had that. It's horrid, and I'm glad it isn't expenditures or needlessness. 'Cause they're catching. Needlessness are, I mean, 'cause they won't let you stay here. You seem, too, to be glad for a good many things, my dear," flattered Aunt Polly, putting her hand to her throat as if color-bound. Pauline laughed softly. "I am. I've been thinking of them a lot. Of them, all of them. I've been looking up that rainbow. I love rainbow. I'm so glad Mr. Pendleton gave me those prims. I'm glad of some things I haven't said yet. I don't know, but I'm most glad I was hurt." "Pollyanna!" Pollyanna laughed softly again. She turned aimless eyes on her aunt. "Well, you see, since I have been hurt, you've been calling me dear lots of time, and you didn't before. I love to be called dear by folks that belong to you. I mean, some of the ladies did call me that, but of course that was pretty nice, but not as so nice as if you had belonged to me, like you do. Oh, Aunt Polly, I'm so glad you belong to me." Aunt Polly did not answer. Her hand was at her throat again. Her eyes were full of tears, and she had turned away and was hurrying from the room through the door by which the nurse had just entered. It was that afternoon that Nancy ran out to old Tom, who was cleaning harness in the barn. Her eyes were wild. Mr. Tom, guess what happened?" she panted. "You couldn't guess in 1,000 years. You couldn't. Then I'll go late. I won't try," retorted the man grimly. "Especially as I hadn't got more'n 10 years live. Anyhow, probably, you'd better tell me off first, Nancy." "Well, listen then. Who do you suppose is in the parlor now with the mistress? Who, I say?" Old Tom shook his head. "There's no telling," he declared. "Yes, there is. I'm telling. It's John Pendleton." "Shoo, now, you're joking, girl." "Not much I am. I'm letting myself, crutches and all. On the team he had come in waiting this minute at the door for him, just as if he wasn't the cracky old crosspatch he is. What never talks to no one. Just think, Miss Tom, him calling on hers." "Well, why not?" demanded the old man a little aggressively. Nancy gave him a scornful glance. "As if you know better than me." she derided. Huh? Oh, you didn't be so innocent, she retorted with a mock indigent. You what will let me wild goose chasing in the first places? Nancy, what do you mean? Nancy glanced through the open barn door toward the houses and came stepped nearer to the old man. Listen, it was you that was telling me Miss Polly had a lover in the first places, wasn't it? Well, one day I think I'll find 2 and 2 and I put them together and make 4, but it turned out to be 5, and no 4 at all. With a gesture, of indifference, old Tom turned and fell to work. If you're going to talk to me, you've got to talk plain horse sense, he declared testily, and there was no end for figures. Nancy laughed. Well, it's this, she explained. I heard something that made me think of him and Miss Polly was lover, Mr. Pendleton. Old Tom straightened up. Yes, oh, I know how he wasn't. Now he wasn't. It was the blessed child mother he was in love with, and that's why he wanted. But never mind that part. She had hastily remembering just in time her promise to Pollyanna to tell that Miss Pendleton had wished her to come and live with him. Well, I've been asking folks about him some since, and I've found that him and Miss Polly hadn't been friends for years, and she's been hating him like a peasant owing to the silly gossip that coupled their names together when she was 18 or 20. Yes, I remember, nodded old Tom. It was 3 or 4 years after Miss Janey gave him the mitten and went off with the other chap. Miss Polly knew about it, of course, and was sorry for him. She tried to be nice to him because maybe she overdid it a little. She hated that minister chap who had took off her sister. At any rate, somebody began to make trouble. They said she was running after him. Running after any man? Her? Interjected Nancy. I know it, but they did, declared old Tom. That of course no elf spunk stand then. That they'll be about that time come her own lover and the trouble with him. After that she shut up like an oyster and wouldn't have nothing to do with anybody for a spell. Her heart just seemed to turn bitter at the core. Yes, I know. I've heard about that now, rejoined Nancy, and that's why you could knock me down with a feather when I spoke. When I see him at the door, toward him when she ain't spoke to for years. But I let him in and went and told her. What did she say? Old Tom held his breath suspended. Nothing at first. She was so still I thought she hadn't heard, and I was just going to say it over when she speak up quiet like this. Tell Mr. Pendleton I will be down at once. And I come and told him. Then I came out here and told you, finished Nancy, casting another backward glance toward the houses. Grunted the old Tom and fell to the work again. In the ceremonious parlor of the Harrington homestead, Mr. John Pendleton did not have to wait long before the swift step warned him of Miss Polly coming. As he attempted to rise, she made a gesture of remonstrations. She did not offer her hand, however, and her face was coldly reserved. I called to ask for Pollyanna, he began, at once a little brusquely. Thank you. She is about the same, said Miss Polly. And that is, won't you tell me how she is? His voice was not quite steady this time. A quick spasm of pain crossed the woman's face. I can't. I wish I could. You mean you don't know? Yes, but the doctor warned himself seeing at sea. He's corresponding now with a New York specialist. They have arranged for a consult at once. But where that were her injuries that you do know? A slight cut on the head, 1 or 2 bruises, and an injury to the spine which has seemed to cause paralysis from the hips down. A low cry came from the man. There was a brief silence. Then huskily he asked, "And Pollyanna, how does she take it? She doesn't understand and all how things really are, and I can't tell her. But she must know something." Miss Polly lifted her hand at the color and her throat in the gesture that had become so common to her of late. Oh yes, she knows she can't move, but she thinks her legs are broken. She says she's glad it's broken legs like yours rather than lifelong invalids like Mrs. No, because broken leg get well and the other doesn't. She talked like that all the time until it seemed as if I should die. Through the blur of tears in her own eyes, the man saw the withdrawn face opposite, twisted with emotion, and Volturia's thought went back to that Pollyanna had said when he had made his final plea for her presence. "Oh, I couldn't leave Aunt Polly now." It was that made him ask very gently as soon as he could control his voice. "I wonder if you know Miss Polly Harrington. Miss Harrington, I heard I tried to get Pollyanna to come and live with me." "With you, Pollyanna?" The man winced a little at the tone of her voice, but his own voice was still impersonally cool when he spoke again. "Yes, I want to adopt her, literally, you understand, making her my heir, of course." The woman in the opposite of there relaxes a little. It came to her suddenly that what a brilliant future would have meant for Pollyanna, this adoption, and she wondered Pollyanna were old enough, mercifully enough, to be tempted by this man, money, and position. "I'm very fond of Pollyanna," the man was continuing. "I'm fond of her both for her own sake and her mother's. I stood ready to give Pollyanna the love that had been 25 years in storage." Love? Miss Polly remembered suddenly why she had taken this child in the first place, and with a recollection came the remembrance of Pollyanna's own words uttered that very morning. "I love to be called dear by folks that belong to you," and it was very love-hungry little girl that had been offered the store of affection of 25 years, and she was old enough to be tempted to be loved. But with a sinking heart, Miss Polly realized that, with a sinking heart too, she realized something else, the dirtiness of her own future now without Pollyanna. "Well," she said, and the man, recognizing the self-control that vibrated through the harshness of the tone, smiled sadly. "She would not come," he answered. "Why?" "She would not leave you. She said you had been so good to her. She wanted to stay with you, and she said she thought you wanted her to stay," he finished as he pulled himself to his feet. He did not look toward Miss Polly. He turned his face resolutely toward the door. But instantly he heard a swift step at the side, and found a shaking hand thrust toward him. "When the specialists come, and I know anything to find about Pollyanna, I will let you hear from me," said a trembling voice. "Goodbye, and thank you for coming. Pollyanna will be pleased."